You're listening to Conversations with Chanda, a podcast that unpacks the community's grittiest, most vexing problems, hosted by Chanda Smith Baker.
Tony and TC, welcome to Conversations with Chanda. I've known you and your work for so long, and I'm just really excited to get into this conversation with you. So welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to be here, Chanda. And, you've been a long-term colleague, friend, and just, honored to be in this conversation with you on your platform here. You're doing big things out there.
I feel it some days. And really some days when I look back, right, and I think that part of this conversation is thinking about education and what it means. And when I think about myself as a student, I wasn't always the best student because I felt like the experience didn't always match how I learned and what I needed.
Right.
And so part of sort of my commitment now is trying to find spaces and places for people to feel included. And often we think about it from a racial point of view, but it is also about like culture and climate and other things that sort of matter in terms of the experiences that allow people to move forward. And so I want to touch on that a little bit. And I would just love it if you just start out and talk about high school recording arts, and then I'm going to back into some thoughts on why it's important for those students that you're working with.
Well, I'd like to start out with saying I can really relate to that experience in school that you spoke about, where maybe the learning style didn't match up with where you were at the time. That was the story of my life. And being a part of the St. Paul Public School District, they had a school called Open School that I eventually ended up in. And as you said, it wasn't about color, it was more about culture. And that school was a project-based, hands-on, experiential learning. And that was the way I really connected to education and what it was and how it could help me be successful. And through that experience is really the platform that High School for Recording Arts was built on. I just took my experience in the recording arts industry and kind of built it around the community learning center model that I had experienced myself. Lo and behold, I think it really works for a lot of young people, and it's a great opportunity in our community.
It's funny because when I think about myself, right, like I don't really like staying in the lines. Like I remember my dad would be like, "Why are you skipping class? Go to the library." And I'm like, because I want to read. I can get a lot from that. I don't want people talking to me. I want to read about it, right? And so it wasn't like I was goofing off and doing bad things. Like I was leaving class to go to the library because I also needed time away from everyone else. And so there's just a value of that style for schools that sort of meet kids where they are. And having some alternative options. But Tony, what about you? How were you as a student? What worked for you?
For me, it was very much culture too. I'm really happy, and you brought it up that way because it really connect like with TC. I grew up in New York and grew up in Brooklyn, and all through my life, full of music. Just family storytelling. Connecting with extended family, barbecues, it's just a sense of spirit, community, family. And then, I go to New York City public schools, and all of a sudden it's just this whole other environment that's sterile, just did not engage me. It didn't feel or look like what I grew up right outside of the school building. It was like, an all Black Puerto Rican community, and in the school, intentioned, but still, mainly white teachers. And for me, that lack of creativity, that lack of connection, really hampered me. I wasn't a disruptive student, but I would drift off. I was bored. And that didn't change until third grade when our teacher introduced me to our new music teacher who came in, who happened to be this tall, dapper African-American man who played the tenor sax and he was a jazz player. And he brought in this cardboard box full of plastic flutophones and passed it out. And then he started a band for us third graders. And, from then on until literally I went to college, I thought I was going to be a musician. But more importantly, to your point, I found myself culturally. I found myself, really touching my spirit and my heart in terms of music. And that was the thing that brought me to school every day. That was the thing that gave me drive and gave me purpose to want to do good in my classes and want to find connections between what I was experiencing and wanting to pursue musically, but to also feed me to be, more knowledgeable about myself and the world so that I could bring that to my creativity. So, that's such an important piece that we take for granted in education that is really, really critical.
I think so too. And, the story of high school recording arts, or like anytime that I think about education, for sure, I think about my own experiences. And I think that is true for a lot of people. And we have been through some stuff together on the school, and we'll talk a bit about it because high school recording arts is a charter school. And I think often people will think about their experience and think about it as a 5-year-old that goes through and engages with all these quality folks. And then they come out at 17 ready to move on with life. And that's not the case for a lot of us. It wasn't necessarily the case for me. There were points that I found passion, but it was hard for me to find my footing. And so TC, talk to me about how you came into what inspired the school.
Well, it was a very unique time in my life where I had been working with Prince in the music industry, and I had a record deal through Warner Brothers. And at the time, Prince, he changed his name to The Symbol, and he wouldn't do anything under Prince. He wanted out of his contract with Warner Brothers. And so eventually when that happened, Warner Brothers let him out of the contract, but at the same time, they cut everybody who was signed to his record label. And I was one of those people. So having to reinvent myself, I opened up a recording studio downtown St. Paul, was on the skywalk level. And I came soon to find out that all the kids that were ditching school basically were hanging around in the skywalk, and they started congregating at my studio because they wanted to show me, their talent and how great they were. They could rap. And initially I was just blowing them off. I was like, I'm busy. I got clients coming. And so they were relentless. They called me out one day. They said, "See, you said you had a client at 2. It's 2:30. We could have made a hit." And so that kind of sparked me because I had been through a similar situation. So I took them in the studio and they just blew me away with what they were able to accomplish. And what took me a couple of days to do, they did in 20 or 30 minutes. They were typing the lyrics in their phone, and then they would get up and go get on the mic and start rapping. And then from there, they wanted to know everything I knew about the music business. How do you publish? How do you copyright? All the ins and outs. And so I started off sending them to the library. I say, well, you got to get an SR or a PA, fill that out, and then they'll send you back a copyright certificate. So they were doing that, and they were like, well, what's a PA or SR? I said, performing arts, sound recording. So I started going through those processes, and then they would come back and ask more questions. I'd say, how come you all ain't at school? What's going on? They were like, oh, they kicked me out. Forget school. I ain't trying to do that. And so that's where the light came on. I said, if you can do publishing and copyrights, in my book, you're already competent as a high school student. So, and that was from my experience of being part of a validation competency-based school myself. And then as they kept congregating and more activity, I called one of my mentors who was the principal at Open School when I was there. And he came over, he was opening the charter schools in Minnesota. He had the St. Paul Family Learning Center. And he said, hey, this is a good idea. He said, how about if I'll just send a teacher over to your studio in the afternoon and we'll enroll the kids in our school. And so that's how it all started. And next thing you know, Tony, he had been working with me through my contract with Warner Brothers. He was working with me on my publishing and copyright stuff. And he started coming in once a month, and he'd do the business of music. And we created a student-operated record label, Another Level Records. And eventually, I was inspired and coached how to actually start an official charter school. And so I went through that process. And then my 3-year renewal was up, and I was kind of in a rough spot because, I'm kind of a raw talker, just hitting the facts, and I needed some help there. And I was telling Tony about it, and he said, man, I wish I could really do something, work with the kids. He was an attorney in New York. And so I invited him. I said, you should come up here and help me. I'm going to do this 3-year review. And he took me on, and he moved to Minneapolis, and the rest is history. We just been like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis ever since then.
I love it. And so just as a matter of context, charter schools work on a contract with their authorizer. And when those contracts come up, there's a renewal process. So that's what you were just speaking to. And so you go through that first renewal, you realize like you got a set of skills and talents, but you needed to round that out, which is just an excellent leadership lesson, right? Like you can't do all the things. You got to call in the talent to help support you. And so, Tony, Here you come. You decided to move from New York to come to Minnesota.
Right.
Well, I got to tell you one other thing. Tony kept telling me all the time. He said, man, I hate doing, I'm being a lawyer. I'm sick of these billables. He was doing some system they have in law. And so he kept telling me that. And that's what sparked me to say, hey, you should come and help me. Because he always said, I wish I could do something like what you're doing, working with the kids. And so it was just like,
I love it because you still kind of in that business a little bit, Tony. It just looks a little different. But talk to me about the move and what intrigued you about it.
Wow, like David said, that was a unique time in my life, right? I met David when he had his album through Paisley Park, and he was promoting it, and we met at a music conference in Atlantic City. And at the time, I had a good friend who worked for Columbia Records, became Sony Records, and he used to bring me out to all of the music conferences, basically hunting for new clients. And so I went to, it was called Impact. And anybody in Black music know what Impact was. It was just like all the Black radio, Black mom and pop record stores back when they had record stores, and promoters and A&R. So all the new acts would come to Impact. The people who were like sign new artists just to break them in. So, I'm in the music business, and I'm really like, dedicated to it. But at the same time, the music business, rough and tumble, so like David said, all the billables. And when I met David and he started bringing me out to Minnesota, this is the height of Prince. So I'm like, Prince, he's as big as Michael Jackson. I'm like, I couldn't believe he grew up with him and was recording with him. But even more than that, coming out to the community here, I really felt a connection creatively. It was just a beautiful thing watching what David described unfold with these young people showing up at the studio every day, just hungry to, really learn and engage in the music business, respectful of what TC's position was in the community, what he had accomplished, and the fact that they gave me space to share with them what I knew. And, it was just all of these things coming together, and, that divine purpose of supporting young people just hit my spirit. So, as I was comparing and contrasting my two lives, my New York life on one hand seems glamorous and all that. On the other hand, it's just a grind, right? And then
Right.
coming out to Minnesota, and it's just love, and it's just create pure creativity, and then eventually building something new. Supporting his vision, just made that opportunity to dedicate myself fully to this not even a hard decision. And to this day, I feel it's the best decision I ever made in my life, to serve young people, to help build an incredible vision, support that, and to now have impacted thousands of young people across this community who are now spread out across the country doing incredible work and have, beautiful lives that, I know we could take some small part of the impetus for that happening. I mean, what could be greater than that?
Y'all got me reflecting, and I was thinking that my point of connection started at one point, but I realized that it was actually when I met Dr. Howard Fuller. He came to town.
Yes.
And, I was single parenting at the time. I had 3 kids at that time. And I was thinking about my own educational experience and really saying, I can put them in the school that's the most convenient, or I need to be thinking about what might work best for the kid that I know individually, what might work best for them. And so when I ran into them, I'm like, oh man, there's a thing called school choice. Like that's not, and my uncle was the first Black superintendent of Minneapolis schools, right? So I had been around education, but it was very much formulated on you go to the school that's nearest you.
Right.
Right. Whether or not it's a fit or not. And so there was something about it that was really intriguing to me. And I started doing a little bit of work with Howard, but really it was coming from a parent hat. And Tony, I remember specifically seeing you'd be like going on a trip and you'd have these students with you.
Yep.
And I'm like, what kind of school is this where it's like, you're taking them to all these great experiences? And I got more and more intrigued by the students, by the level of sort of investment in their hostels, like education outside a classroom. Like there were all these things that were really hitting me in terms of what would have spoke to me as a student, what I was hoping would speak to me as my children as students. And so I think that my question here is, who are your students? Like, who are they? Like, these were kids primarily that weren't in school. They obviously were smart. They obviously have talent, but they weren't investing themselves into the school environment. Is that the student that you started with? Was that the profile? Like, can you give us a profile of who you have helped that are now across the country doing great things?
Definitely. I mean, I would start out, like I said, we had I think the roughest, toughest kids in the community who had basically been kicked out or dropped out of the traditional school, and they were struggling. They're coming from chaotic family systems and community. And but they wanted something. They were passionate about music and expressing themselves. But I think even a deeper seed was entrepreneurship. They wanted to learn about, finances, how to protect their intellectual property and become successful citizens. And so it's a full spectrum. But then again, there were other kids who just needed a different approach or a different style of learning opportunity with the hands-on experiential learning. Tony, he really spearheaded the record label, Another Level Records, which was another tool for our students to get them involved in entrepreneurship and understanding the law and how that worked.
Yeah. And I think building on that, our students were the ones that you think about coming out of hip hop culture in the 80s and the 90s, especially in urban centers where we know, things around poverty, issues around race and and really having systems not working to really support, our families and being something that we could rely on to, just help us navigate that path towards, really being able to be stable. Our young people are those young people who, because of all those things and their resilience and their resourcefulness and just their spirit, and then their genius as incredible music creators and lyricists, you know, the system wasn't designed for all of that. Everything I described, it just wasn't designed to understand it, to know how to connect with it, build relationship with it, and then how to nurture it and take it to a whole other level. So, these kids came from rough and tumble backgrounds, but, that's America. If, particularly if you're Black, brown, indigenous, that's just the way that it was. That is a matter of survival. And it's also a matter of, how are you going into a space that really understands who you are? So, for us, those young people are the ones that we wanted because we knew what the power of, what David had done. We didn't talk about this, David signed up with Prince, but he put out the first hip hop song in Minnesota. He came to Prince with a hip hop mentality and persistence to, get him to sign him to rap, although he was, eventually graduated, found a school. He talks about, that eventually took the time to get to know him in the way I described. Before that, he had been kicked out of 4 or 5 different schools.
True.
But here's a brother who's a genius, right? How does a school miss that? What's not happening in the design to recognize what David brought to the table? So those are our young people. They've gone through something that, unfortunate in our society that has created those circumstances to make it that they have to be rough and all these other kind of things. But when you don't have a school that knows how to unpack that, you're going to have those young people then kicked out of schools. We don't call them dropouts because I think that puts too much of the onus on them, like it's their fault. We know that a school could be designed properly to fit who they are and what they've come through so that, they don't drop out. And, so, for us, it's about how do we continue to identify those young people and make sure that every day we're thinking about who they are, what are they coming with? What are those assets and abilities, those passions, so that we could tap into that, so we could build strong relationships while at the same time providing them all the supports and resources that they need to navigate through whatever obstacles that they're going through, so that full bent of genius that each has can be fully maximized.
Mm-hmm. I love so much about this. I can't remember when the charter school law came in place. Was it 92 or 93 here in Minnesota?
Yep.
It was somewhere right in there. And I think this sort of coincides, a little bit when I was starting to look, it was a few years down the way, but like the role of schools had started to change. There was another option. And we were the first in the country in Minnesota to offer this as a law, and it was meant to bring education home and to create innovation, a place for like a for us, by us motto that has been pretty politicized, right? You either are on the side or you're not, right? And you all know my story, and the roles that I've had and people, you deal with these charter schools and all this kind of stuff. And so you have students that have been kicked out. You are reconnecting them to education. You're using the motto of charter schools to have created this innovative motto. What can you say about the role that charter schools do have or could have, particularly in Minnesota where they've struggled?
I think it's really a blessing. charter schools have opened up so much opportunity, I think, for a lot of our young people in the community, and bringing the community together around the issues around education. It has caused us to explore a little deeper, analyze more, and get a better understanding of what it takes to reach our kids. I think that we really have a opportunity with charter schools to be able to explore so much and accomplish so much. It's just sometimes so frustrating because the work is so hard, because you're working on two fronts. One is trying to manage the families and community and help the young people, but then on the other hand, you're having to fight with the politics and the bureaucracy. Sometimes will overrule common sense, and it's just that becomes the struggle that I think kind of tears at the fiber of what we're doing. But at the same time, I think it's necessary. Choice is something that everyone wants. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. You want to have an opportunity to choose what's right for you. And I think that it's our work and our opportunity to make that happen. I think that schools in history have changed. The pendulum swings back and forth, but most of the stuff we're doing, it's not new. It's not something that hasn't been done before. Apprenticeships, internships, hands-on experiential learning, validation-based, competency-based are tools that we can use and that we should use to engage different styles of learning so that we can, direct the pathway to success.
When you think about charter schools, one question to answer is, why did they even come into existence? Obviously they came into existence because there was a need. There was a question of whether the traditional public education system was addressing the diversity of need in the community. Charter schools are public schools. We still have the same responsibility as any other public school. Our students still need to abide by all the same criteria as other students. But the difference is that, like you said, Chanda, when you were in your neighborhood, you went to your closest school. And if you're of a certain economic level, you may not have the ability to move to a better school neighborhood or district, or be able to get to a better school, and you might be stuck in that school. And because of that, you had a lot of people that eventually rose up to policy level people who said something needs to change. And the system wasn't changing fast. The traditional system wasn't changing fast enough. And that's how chartering came into existence. And when you think about it, it's really, really important in terms of the fact that, everything is changing now technologically. I mean, we're just in a fast changing phase in our human existence. The only thing that hasn't changed is education. We're still essentially doing education like we did 150 years ago. You can't find hardly any other industry that is stuck in just doing it basically the same way. Mm-hmm. So we're committed to innovation. We're committed to trying different things to see what works. That means sometimes you might fail and you have to learn from that failure. Yep. But when you have an entrenched system that doesn't, lean into innovation, fail once, gotcha. It's like, so you just get into this mode of just being stuck doing it the same way and get, real minimal gains or deviations from what you're trying to accomplish. That doesn't really satisfy the huge challenges and tasks that we really need to accomplish with our young people to get them ready for this 21st century economy. Dr. Fuller, you mentioned him before. He really crystallized for David and me, just like you, Chanda, with this whole choice, chartering, and just particularly enabling, mainly BIPOC, Black, working class, poor families to have the benefit of choice. He talked all about how, families of means, they're going to find the best fit school for their kid, whether it's public school, private school, military school, sobriety school, whatever. They'll ship their kid to a boarding school in a second if that's what they need to do. But then some of them are the first ones to say, oh, but we shouldn't have charter schools. Well, we shouldn't have charter schools? They mean for those who don't have the means to have the ability to have the choice based on their economic status. Mm-hmm. There's something fundamentally unfair about that. And so, on that alone, and, thank you, Dr. Fuller, for all that you've done to help educate us and give us the sense of, fight and the words to use to confront this situation so that, we know what we're doing is righteous, and we know what we're doing is about empowering those who usually have had the least power. We believe in chartering, we believe in choice, and we believe in continuing to be a better school despite all the challenges and no matter how hard the work is. And it is hard, and we never are perfect, but we're committed to continuous improvement, and we're committed to confronting whatever's in front of us so that we can serve our students as best we can.
Been around 25 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, 25 years. That's awesome. And there was a point at which you might not have been around or two, right? And so this is where I enter again.
Yes.
Right. I'm at Pillsbury United. Now I'm a sponsor, moved over to being an authorizer. And, I was just a mom trying to figure out some solutions for my kids. And because I was vocal about that, I got positioned to be an authorizer for the school. And there was a couple of things that I encountered right away, right? Like when people knew I were doing it, they would come up, you're trying to destroy public education. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I didn't write the law. I didn't write the bill. They exist. There's kids that look like me in them. So I'm going to go where them people are. I'm going to go where my people are. If the people are in charter schools, that's where I'm going to go. So that was sort of my look at it, right? Not understanding all of the political elements of it. The second thing that came in that I wanted to just talk about, because I know somebody's thinking about it, is that are these schools working or not, right? Like they're coming, they're not producing better results in some cases based on the evaluation that has been socialized, right? I have a different opinion on it. I'm not a good test taker, so I'm not really, I'm one of them people where I'm like, I'm smart, but I might fail your test, sort of thing, right?
Right.
But I say all this because I think that there are different measurements of success. So when I encountered you all, what I was most impressed with was, number one, the age of the kid coming into your program was older.
Yep.
Number two, it was that I had an impression, and I think sometimes you hear it, they're taking away students from this school, right? As though the kids belong to a school and not to parents, or to a system and not to community or whatever, right?
Right.
But then I quickly found out that most of those kids actually weren't coming from the school system. Right. Yeah. So I just started really just checking off stuff that people were saying that I sort of leaned into and believed that, like, you all were like recruiting out the gym or something, right, to get kids to come to you. And actually you're recruiting off the streets to get kids back in school. So that's a very different image of who we're talking about.
Yeah. Right.
We're also talking about kids that were extremely bright, but incredibly behind.
Yep.
Yes.
So getting to an age level, a grade level proficiency takes on a different meaning when they're coming in so behind. And many of them had dropped out of a traditional school, which means that school was part of their equation before they got to you. So, you got a older student behind coming out of community, not necessarily out of a school. Like, I know that's not all your students. I know that this is a broad, but I'm saying this because it was disruptive to my image of who was going into charter schools. So I want to make sure that I mention it. But can you talk to me about your measures of success?
Well, first of all, I want to mention that, like you said, without a community that understands that our deep thinkers, we wouldn't be here, because if it wasn't for Pillsbury and organizations like that, that really take the time to understand what we're doing and authentically want to help young people be successful, it would be impossible, because the system, like you said, would just eat us alive. And I'm thankful for that relationship that we were able to eventually have with Pillsbury. And also that's what brought you into our lens too. You've been an amazing support for our school, I know, along with a lot of other charter schools. But with that, I just want to say that the community as a whole really has been supportive. You know, if they're on the ground and they're on the front lines or behind the scene, that really understand, they've come to the fight for us. You know, Carlos Mariani and different legislators who have put their party line aside and said, no, this is what's right for students in our community. That's what's made us be successful as a program and a school. And our kids, you know, vibe off of that. Believe it or not, we're able to bring that resilience to and give them a glimpse of what it takes and what we went through. I mean, we would literally be judged for students, like you said, that were coming with academic deficiencies, and they would basically blame us, you know, say, well, your students aren't graduating on time at a certain level. And we're like, well, when we get the students, they're already behind and we're working to improve their situation. So, you know, in reality, we are helping them, because if they came in reading at a third grade level and the next year they're reading at a fourth grade level, then that means they made a year progress. So it's not necessarily reflective of just a snapshot of a test, like you said, that shows where a student's at right at that point, but it really is a more holistic opportunity to for a student to make improvement.
Yeah, it becomes a little hard to explain this sometimes to the general public, because basically they've been told for so long through the media and through, you know, education bureaucrats that achievement is based around a reading level, right? Or, you know, certain other kind of indicators, like, you know, you graduate in 4 years, then you know, you're successful in that sense. And what we know is that you can be successful in life, you could be competent in life, and you may not be the greatest reader. You may not have the greatest math score. You may not graduate in 4 years. It may take you 5, 6, 7 years. But are you competent? Are you able to be productive? Are you able to be responsible and you know, a citizen and enterprising and entrepreneurial? So for us, you know, we break through those traditional metrics of achievement, because one, we're getting young people over 85% who are coming to us already at about 2 years behind school, because they been pushed or kicked out of the traditional system. So they've just been, you know, out of school for that amount of time. And then when they come to us, they're reading between the 3rd and 5th grade level, not to put anything on that young person in terms of how bright or brilliant they are, but looking at the metrics that the traditional system values, they've now have put a kid out at 14, 15, reading at a third grade level. And now they're in the streets, languishing. We bring them in. And like David said, initially, the system wants to blame us because they're 2 years behind reading at a third grade level, day one that they come into our doors. What we're saying is that, no, we're not going to probably turn them into reading at 10th, 11th, 12th grade level in the couple of years that we have them. But what we are going to do is give them experiences and opportunities in life to become a learner, to understand what they're passionate about and what it means to commit yourself to that passion in terms of being a learner and being competent and becoming a master at a particular area of human endeavor. It may be music production. It might be want to be a scientist or doing something in government or starting a business. And what we find out then is that as we're engaging them in their passion and what they really are driven to want to learn, those other areas, reading, math, all those other areas, that's going to kick in.
Yeah.
They're going to say, okay, I know I need to do better at that. Mm-hmm. And then all of that may not happen in those couple of years we just have them, but because we've got them feeling like they're a learner again, then they become the term a lifelong learner.
Yes.
They're going to continue to build on their skills and competencies that they need to be successful. The traditional system doesn't account for any of what I just talked about. They don't know how to put that into a neat little package. The news media doesn't know how to tell that story in a coherent way. They still boil it down to what's the school's reading score? How many graduated in 4 years? And what that does on a level that we should be super concerned about is that it leaves all these young people out of that opportunity to continue to engage them, even if they had that disruption in school. We're a re-engagement school. There are re-engagement practices that can really transform a young person despite that disruption and despite that low proficiency metric in terms of, reading and math, to still being able to be successful. So what we do is, like I said, we build on all of those things. And when we have, like now, having graduated probably 1,300 to 1,400 young people in the time we've been here as a small school, we have contributed to society and a social impact in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of being dependent on society because we know if you don't graduate, if you don't have that re-engagement, and if you don't take that young person and put them on a track to becoming a lifelong learner, they're going to become dependent on society. They're more susceptible to imprisonment, and they're even more susceptible to generational poverty and shorter lifespans. To productive, where now they're contributing, they're paying taxes, they're creating businesses, they're doing all the other things, they're flipping it. So that's why there's such a huge social and economic impact for the work that we're doing that you rarely hear anything talked about.
Yeah, I think that why I wanted to sort of go in the middle and the heart of this conversation so that we can expand sort of the worldview of how we see education. And the one thing that I really understood deeply from your school, and as I got more educated on this, is that a lot of times when we are talking about, at one point, it was like a 50% graduation rate for Black students in Minneapolis, right? And I remember thinking it's a 50% graduation rate for the students that are in school.
Right. Yep.
Right. For the ones that are in school, exactly.
The ones that you're actually tracking. But there's a whole group of people that fell off early on, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, at ages that we wouldn't even understand because they're so invisible. And this re-engagement model is available for some of the students that we're not even capturing.
Yep.
And I think that was when it really went off for me, the value of doing that, and the value, if people can just think about the value of being seen, the value of being able to go into a space imperfect and have people like still see what is good about you, right? That you're not about the circumstances that you were born into.
Yes.
You all have a community of educators that see these students for who they are, the genius that exists right now, and then you work to uncover it so that they can see it and flourish. And so just thank you for that. Thank you for the impact. And hopefully those that are listening, can think about education from a point of view of the students that never fit, right? Not the ones that are fitting and maybe underachieving, because there's so many nuances in this story of what you're doing in the lives of the kids that you're helping. And so, to go back, so you started out on the Skyway and the Skywalk in the city. This is a Minnesota thing, y'all, because it's cold. You got to walk through, stay inside, right? Then the charter school law comes. You bring some experts around the table. You start the school. So talk to me about the motto of the school and how it's doing this project-based living, teaching. You have music is still very much involved in it. So can you just say what the motto is, what the educational hook is to get these kids engaged?
Well, as always, the core has been the recording arts. And that initially started out like music, but it has expanded to video, graphic design, building experiences. I have kids, they come in, sometimes they want to be like the best rapper. They see Jay-Z or somebody, they think that's what they want to do. And they've actually end up becoming the best audio engineer or even electrical master electricians. So every so often we'll tear the studio down and do a deep clean, and they'll reconnect all of the equipment back. And they find out they're working with their hands. They discover something else that they like about the recording industry, or they're supportive. They learn that, live sound is a whole nother part of the industry. There's media occupations. There's a management. There's so many different facets of the recording arts and music industry, that photography, some things that they don't even know, they don't even know that they love and they're a master at. They have to be exposed. Exposure is a big thing. One of the other things, like you said, is travel. That was one of my passions for this school, was to get young people to travel, like you said, what Tony was doing. Because a wise man once told me, the world is like a book. And if you don't travel, you only get to read one page. So that's been part of our history is, we've taken over 4 trips to Africa, Europe, all over the United States. Our kids have toured and performed and been involved with, different areas of the world. And so
I'm going with a group on December 17th to Philadelphia.
Right.
We're partnering with a school there, Hill Freeman, and they're shooting a music video about Minneapolis and Philadelphia in terms of its music legacy. So they're doing history, they're studying the history of it, they're interviewing music legends from both cities. They've collaborated musically. They just performed at Paisley Park together. So, when David talks about that travel, he's talking about it very much steeped in not only that creative side, but that, learning side of what we want our students to be able to demonstrate competency as, graduates from when they leave here. So it's really a powerful, powerful way of learning. And every young person, irrespective of where their, economic station is, should be able to have that opportunity. And that's why, it's such a core element of who we are. We like to talk about HSRA as like, a private school, experience for young people from the hood, that they come in here and all of a sudden they look around and they see the equipment, they see the staff student ratio, is incredible. The opportunity to travel, all of those things are what they deserve.
It shows them that we're really invested in them.
Yeah.
We're able to keep putting the money back into the school. We have some of the best equipment, the best opportunities for them to really, learn the business and get engaged on a high level, not with some, something that's used, that's broken, but something that's new, that's industry standard, that's going to put them in a position to get a job and get employed in the industry.
A lot of times, too, we think that the best things for students that are struggling is to have their butt in a seat for a longer period of time. And I think that sometimes globally, we miss the idea that experiences are the best teachers and that, early exposure.
Yes.
Right. I spent the weekend, watching Rhythm and Flow, right? Season 1, I watched it again.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I love it because even in that, right, some of the artists is like, I dropped out of school, I did this. Like I could see a local kid that I know, right, that is sitting here and being judged. And like, if you don't do this, you're going to end up here, you're going to end up there. And this whole very scary definition of where they're headed that we use publicly often that gets into their psyche. And then they start rapping and start doing this stuff. And you're like, they talking about words I don't even know. They're putting stuff together off their head,
Yes.
right? And these ciphers and these, battles and stuff. And it's just amazing to expand what we see as learning and as an opportunity for students. And so I know that part of what you guys have done is staying in touch with other people across the country. And I also want to point out this fact is that through my exposure to Dr. Fuller, I was able to, along with others, and I know you all have been there, to what they call 90-90-90 schools. So 90% kids of color, 90% proficiency, 90% free and reduced lunch. And these are largely in places that aren't quite as politicized in some ways, or that has expanded. This is in my mind, the opportunity for those schools to achieve that, right? Looking at alternate measures, all this kind of thing. And so my ability to sort of see that and be exposed to schools that have different hours, different approaches to learning, using technology in ways that I haven't seen our schools. This was early on. Also opened up what could happen in classrooms because I had such a point of view on that. So I'm bringing this up because you all are very integrated with schools that are doing this project-based approach, that are using hip hop curriculums, that are thinking about how to meet the students. And as part of your impact to our country, to education, you have started something called Remix Ed, right? Because it's time to mix it up a little bit. It's time for us to think differently if we want to change the opportunities available for our young people so that they can live the lives that they are owed to be able to experience. Talk to me about why Remix Ed. Talk to me about why not just do your school? Like, why Remix Ed? What are you thinking? What are you hoping for that?
Well, I just want to say what we've learned over these years is that the conditions of our young people, the brilliance that they have, the lack of opportunities they have across this country in various places to have that brilliance really tapped into and nurtured is pervasive. We travel, David and I travel different cities, and we've had people from across the country visit us here who have said, if there was an HSRA back in St. Louis, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, blah, 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 the same young people they could see would just blossom And, over the years, we've embraced that thought and have said, what is our responsibility? Do we just kind of keep it here, or do we share our learning? And obviously, this is it's not a job. This is a cause for us. We believe in our young people, and we can't just sit back and allow, their, their full potential to not have a chance to be realized. So, our exploration into sharing that learning, creating a sister organization, the HSRA, to do that work and to engage with great partners around the country in that pursuit has just been incredible. And, one of the things we do is, every year we bring that whole community together just to talk about the work and to share our practices and to, showcase our young people and give them a chance to, connect with each other. And the Hill Freeman example with Philadelphia is a part of that remix. And, this also comes out of a book that was written about us. It's really TC's story, Hip Hop Genius.
Remixing education.
It's subtitles, Remixing Education. And, it tells the story of, David's vision and everything, but it also tells the story of the challenges we went through that you shared with, the Minnesota Department of Education, one to just, evaluate us on just some inappropriate metrics, but also some of the great things that we've accomplished with our students that no one would have expected. Our students have created national campaigns with major corporations like State Farm around the so-called dropout rate. Every 26 seconds, a young person drops out of school. Our students toured the country and worked with LeBron James and State Farm to create media messaging. Our students have won the North American Championship for Company of the Year against privileged schools across the United States and Canada.
We're number one.
Junior achievement. Yep.
Yes.
Some of our graduates during the pandemic sued the state of Minnesota because they weren't given unemployment insurance to students still in school because of an archaic law from I think the 1800s or something, who said, if you're unemployed, you don't get unemployment insurance if you're still in school. Well, in 2022, during the heart of the pandemic, those students who have jobs are taking care of themselves and maybe the biggest breadwinner in their family and still want to be in school to get a high school diploma. Why should they be deprived?
Some of them are parents.
Yeah.
Right. Our parents.
Yes.
So they sued the state of Minnesota and won.
Yep.
They went to the legislature, got a law passed, and now over $50 million in the state of Minnesota has been paid out to teenagers for unpaid unemployment insurance because of what we know when business closed down during the pandemic. Those are our students.
Those were kids that came right out of this school.
Right. So I'm saying that all to say, when people come and want to hear what we've learned and engage with us to co-design with them in their communities, and to work with them to, do either some version or more pure model of what we're doing, we're all for it. We believe that's our civic, mission to do that.
Yeah.
So thank you for asking about that, Chanda.
Yes.
And I think that, some of the exposure and the people that you bring in are folks that are doing amazing work, right? And I think looking at curriculum and approach and looking at some of the exemplars that are happening that are engaging students that have been struggling. And basically what I've seen is that you're bringing them here for us to think differently about education, to open up sort of our minds to see what's possible and hopefully to push everyone towards how do we engage students that have been underengaged, that are the furthest behind? How do we think about where the future of education is and getting them prepared? And so I imagine that your vision of doing that work just continues to grow. It's a relatively intimate experience now, but is your vision that it continues to grow? If there was an action right? Aside from people just thinking differently about what's possible in education, what other action would you want as you're thinking about remix ed?
Well, you know, we continue to learn too. I mean, I'm talking about us going out and sharing our learning. Sharing our learning is you know, symbiotic. You know, we get as much as we give back. I think, where we want things to go is just for some of these um, um, meaningless political divisions and lines to dissipate so that we
Yes.
could really work together more
Yes.
closely. We have better communications and better regard from people around the country than oftentimes we have in our own neighborhoods and community here. And that's only because of the political divisions that you even spoke about. Well, the challenges we have in public education today are way too big for those to be of any real benefit. The more we can work together and come together and allow ourselves the space and the grace to do this work, in a way that is collaborative and cooperative, we're going to better serve our young people. So, the media could do a much better job in not trying to exasperate those divisions and exploit them and really understand and go deeper into really what those challenges are, because especially coming out of the pandemic, it's never been more challenging now. Young people are dealing with hopelessness, depression, anxiety, houselessness, fragility. I mean, and that's rising in income. You have now working class, middle class, even, upper class families that are struggling in terms of young people's and their mental, emotional health. We need to be working together. We need to recognize that, that's the only way we're really going to solve the problem, or we're just going to be tearing each other apart to the point where, we're lesser and lesser good use to what our young people need.
Yeah, Tony, too, I wanted to mention that was part of the development of For Learning Remix Education, because initially we were branching out and we were working at opening other schools in other cities, like high school for recording arts. But because of, like Tony said, the politics and the division, we found that we could create like in-school academies. We had to become innovative to figure out ways to get this programming to our students, to people who need the help. And it couldn't always be through the charter school process of opening another charter school. We eventually started partnering with existing schools, existing school districts, and bringing some of our best practices there and just innovating and sharpening and understanding how it could work in that environment also. And that has been successful.
Yeah. It's not a vanity project. It's not about having high school for recording arts names across the country. It's really about how can we get to that young person that needs this experience and this opportunity, working with communities who are open to collaborating and, like I said, co-designing with us. That's far more important than a name.
Mm-hmm. I know I keep harping on this because I don't know if it's, PSTD from when we were trying to keep the school open or whatever, but, I just keep reinforcing this because the system in which our schools are operating is limiting the innovation that could exist.
Yeah.
And that, I couldn't always find the words to say, right? Like, what is happening here is working. Like, I know you see this one indicator and you think that it is a sign of failure. It's not a sign of failure, right? So how do we match innovation with a archaic measurement? And then how do you not negate the fact that there has to be accountability to make sure that we're making progress? Because you're not saying there should be no measurements, right? But to me, the data should inform the strategy, not whether or not the students are not defining students' ability, but really defining the system's inability to reach the student. And so much of it has been based on the kids. But I was just, as an authorizer, I was just always sitting in the middle of, there's something that's so good at all these schools that if the system wasn't undermining its ability to be successful,
Yep.
Yes.
would be the R&D arm of public education. And then what I hear you all saying is that you all have found some techniques that work with students that the schools are struggling with. And now you're partnering in some cases with them in a way that's a win-win for that school and your school, the students and the community.
Yeah, well, back to the core. I mean, that's what charter schools were really created for, was for innovation, to try different things without having the system rigidity that doesn't allow you to experiment or be able to be agile. And so I think that, it comes down, it always starts reverting back to the money, funding the system, where, really we need to focus on the young people, the student, and how are we going to be able to transform a young person into a lifelong learner, a problem solver, and a productive citizen. So nothing should get in the way of that. No bureaucracy, no licensure, no union. Nothing should be in the way of helping young people be successful and become lifelong learners.
I love it. I appreciate you all being in this conversation, Tony and TC. And then, Tony called him David at one time,
That's
TC
me.
got all the names. So that's the same person. But I want to just really just tee this conversation up, as we've made a commitment to sort of stay in this conversation of what does it look like to remix education? What does it look like? How do we amplify some of the strategies, the tools? And so we're going to be having a number of conversations over the course of this upcoming year. You all have the conference that comes up annually, and we want to keep our listeners sort of engaged in the things that you all see are working best for the students that need us the most. So I want to thank you for your leadership and your contribution and the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well,
thank you. Thank you so much again for having us. Also, I want to thank my man, Tony, for being a true partner and, helping me bring this thing to life. It wouldn't exist without you guys. So it's the community, it's all of us working together.
You are like the band never broke up, right? Like all these bands break up. You all have been able to figure out how to be in leadership together. And that's a remarkable story by itself.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Chanda. We really appreciate you.
If you'd like to explore more content and join our community, find us at conversationswithchanda.com. We have a wonderful collection of episodes featuring notable guests that you can enjoy on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And I also invite you to follow our journey and add us on Instagram at Conversations with Chanda. Until next time.